Here I am, Amber Wolf, with my dear friend Gregg Braden, and I'm delighted. Thank you so much for saying yes to this interview, Greg. And I know how busy you are filling the world with what is now, I feel, your seminal work. I don't know if you have any plans to write anything else. I'm sure you probably will, but up until this book, I feel like every other book has been a stepping stone, of
Mm.
course, as it should be. But this is masterful. Your writing style, your subject matter, and thank you so much for bringing this to the world. And I just want to sneak this little bit of bio in because people who see this may not know these things about you. Gregg Braden's a 5 times New York bestselling author, scientist, and pioneer in the emerging paradigm of bridging science, social policy, and human potential. And this book is in the center of that target. And that from 1979 to 91, Gregg worked as a problem solver during times of crisis. Boy, that surely wasn't it. For Fortune 500 companies, including Martin Marietta, now known as Lockheed Martin, where you worked as a senior computer systems analyst and Cisco Systems and became the first technical operations manager in 1991. And that you continue to solve problems today. Yes. And your research resulted in 2003, the discovery of intelligent information coded into the human genome. Remember when we used to call junk DNA? Do you
Yep.
remember that? I
Yeah.
just can't even believe that was a thing. And in 2010, the application of fractal time, which is one of your books that is to predict future occurrences of past events. You have 17 film credits, 12 award-winning books, and now published in 40 languages. That's everybody, I think, except maybe some tribes that don't even have a language. And in 2020, you were nominated for the prestigious Templeton Prize, established by Sir John Templeton to honor outstanding individuals who have devoted their talents to expanding our vision of human purpose and ultimate reality. You presented in 34 countries on 6 continents and spoken to the United Nations and Fortune 500 companies and the US military. And I am delighted to say that I have hosted and produced you since 2015, and we've had some great times.
Yeah.
So I'm here today to talk with Gregg about his book, Pure Human, the hidden truth of our divinity, our power, and our destiny. So thank you so much, Gregg, for that.
Wow, Amber, you just covered a whole lot of
Yeah,
ground. This is the first time
yeah,
I have seen and spoken with you in the new year. So I'm going to begin by
yeah.
saying happy, amazing, big, beautiful
Here it
2025 to you.
is.
Yeah, I am coming to you from our studio. We're just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. I think we're on the same time zone
Yeah,
today.
we
So,
are.
so that makes it nice. You're in
Yeah,
Tucson, is that right?
yeah, that's right.
So we're in the same time zone, which is rare. And just thank you for
Mm,
appreciating. I heard a lot of things there. I prefer to think of myself less as busy and more as having a joyously full schedule because the book that you're talking about is meaningful in people's lives. I did something different with this book, Amber, than I have done with any of the other books with the current publisher. I've been with Hay House. This is our publisher. This is our 20-year anniversary. I began with them in 2004. 2024 was 20 years. So I did something a little different. First, I didn't pull any punches in what I was writing. In the past, I have been guided by their editorial staff in
yeah,
certain directions because they are a self-help publisher and they wanted to really, their idea of self-help didn't always match my idea of self-help. And so We have very compartmentalized books. They're good books, and I'm thrilled with
Yeah.
them, about very specific aspects of our experience. In this book, I wanted this book to be relevant to what we're seeing in the world, in our lives, what we're experiencing. And I actually did something I've never done. I took 7 months out of our tour schedule with a couple of exceptions that were already on the books. And I wrote this book from home rather than writing it in the airports and on airplanes and hotel rooms because I felt like the message in the book warranted that level of time and attention. I wanted to be very precise with what I was saying. And I'll tell you a little story. It's interesting. I had a little pushback on the title of the book
Mm.
as well as the theme. And I said, that's fine. I'm going to write it. I'll publish it. If it doesn't go through the publisher, I'll publish it independently. This is what I want to say. In May of 24, during the edit process, something miraculous happened. And I met with the senior staff from the publishing company, and there was a 180. And
Wow.
all of a sudden, they not only understood why I was writing, I mean, I went and physically met with them. I looked them in the eyes. I felt their hearts. They felt my heart. I shared with them what I felt was what I would call a graceful urgency.
Mm.
Urgent in the sense that it's happening now, graceful in the sense that we have time to remedy the concerns that I'm bringing up in the book. And they all of a sudden wanted the book as it was with that title, and they wanted it months ago.
Wow.
So they have been now very supportive of this work, and I want to give them a shout out because we're all growing and learning together, and we all want to serve our community and my family, my global family. And I want to just thank them for they stepped back and gave me tremendous latitude. Very little editing went into this, and other than some grammar and punctuation, very little editing went into it. They let me say it exactly as I wanted to say it, and I want to honor Hay House for that because they're growing as our world is changing, and that's not always the case. So there's
That's beautiful.
yeah, and I wanted to
I
say that.
noticed in the acknowledgement that you did speak about that. And
Wow, you read my
I,
acknowledgments.
of
Nobody ever reads the
course,
acknowledgments.
of
Thank you.
course. And I would like to do this for people that are watching. I'd like to read this paragraph from your introduction because it really says so much, did to me, and I feel
Hmm.
that it will to other people. The purpose of this book is to remind us all of how powerful, precious, and sacred we are. I've written Pure Human to offer us a sense of direction and peace as together we chart the course of our future and our destiny. Our humanness is worth preserving. If you've ever wanted to think differently about yourself and your untapped potential, but were reluctant to do so due to lack of evidence revealing those potentials, the pages that follow are for you. And a
Hmm.
big yes to that.
Wow.
And
Well,
so,
thank you, Amber. So when I wrote the book, this book is again the title, "Pure Human: the hidden truth of our divinity, power, and destiny," and it actually encapsulates two parallel themes. And I think that was one of the things that the publisher had a problem with because it was very different from other people just go after one idea. One of those themes is that there's a concerted effort in the world right now that we are all casualties of to
mm,
replace our humanness with technology.
mm,
Now, we've seen that outside of our bodies in the past, but for the first time, we have the technology now to change not only the world around us, but the world inside of us. And the graceful sense of urgency that I'm talking about is that we will all be coerced, indoctrinated, we will be enticed, and in some cases mandated
yeah,
to make the changes to incorporate this technology into our bodies between now and the year 2030. And there's a whole conversation about why 2030. It has been earmarked as a cosmological date, an astronomical date, an astrological date. And corporations and governments and nations are targeting that date as the end date where they, if their vision is realized, they have remade the world. And the only way to remake the world is to remake our bodies. So in a time when our humanness is being denigrated in public schools and certainly in mainstream media, my goal, Amber, at the very least was, I hope, and I wrote to this, I had it in my mind as I was writing every day and every night. I hope that the reader comes away with, at the very least, a deeper sense of appreciation for what it means to be human, and even a step further, perhaps even a sense of pride. I am deeply proud of our human heritage, and the more I learn, and the more I discover, and the more evidence is uncovered, the more proud I am of who we are, where we've come from, and perhaps most importantly, what we have in front of us and the potential that we can accomplish. So that was one theme of the book. And then the other theme is the new science, the discoveries that are simply not published in mainstream journals and in classrooms and textbooks on the one hand. The other hand, they're peer reviewed. I mean, these aren't hearsay discoveries. These are peer reviewed. They're in the real journals of the real scientists, not the pop science that you see on airport newsstands and talk shows on TV, paid pop scientists. These are the real scientists that are telling us, and this is a mind blower to me, that our natural biology meets and in many cases exceeds the capabilities of the very technology that we're being told we need to put into our bodies to be the best version of ourselves. So those are the two parallel themes. And I wanted to make the book accessible, reader friendly, whether you're a homemaker or an over the road truck driver, uh, because I have this on audio. I went to the
Yeah.
studio in my own voice, and a lot of people they actually prefer the audio because they
Sure.
travel a lot.
Yeah.
Or if you're a student or you're an engineer, this book was written for you, for each of those people to bring these ideas into focus and give us a meaningful pathway forward. What can we do to preserve our humanness in an age where we're being taught that we need something outside of ourselves to be the best version of ourselves. So thank you for the opportunity to just
Yeah.
describe a little bit about why I wrote the book to be.
And
And
I
by the way,
love
that
the way
well,
you've,
part two is already under, there is a part two. I broke it into two books because it would be too much to put
okay.
it into one book. So there
Wow.
is a part two. Pure Human 2 is in the works right now.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure I'll get through this one by the time that one
I
is
hope
out.
so.
So the whole digital invasion is one thing. And I saw on a Facebook feed a man who refused to have his picture taken at the airport. And he had a driver's license and a passport, but they still wouldn't let him through without
Yeah.
having the picture. So it's everywhere. And, in Whole Foods here in Tucson, they have a place where you can scan your palm instead of your card. Which, I mean, that's just another scan. But yeah, so it's,
No, it's very real. So
yeah.
what's happening, Amber, is that there is a movement. First of all, I'm just going to back up. So many people have come to me the end of 24 and early in 25. I've been on a media tour across the country,
Mm.
in studio, live media tour. And I see people in the airports and the restaurants and they say, Greg, isn't it interesting that so many things are happening all at the same time, that so much change is happening spontaneously, that isn't it a coincidence, quinky dink, that this is happening? And my response to that surprises a lot of people because what we're witnessing in the world, it's not a coincidence, it's not a synchronicity, it is a process. There is a structure, there's a sequence, there's a process, we're in it. It's
Mm.
not like it's going to happen 20 years down
Not
the road or
random.
even 10 years down the road. We're in it. And the only way out of this process, now that we're in it, is to go through it. My goal is that we go through it in a healthy way, that we come in with a soft landing. And I think it's very possible to do that. What's driving this process And a lot of this stuff people hear bits and pieces of. 1901, there was an organization that was founded that very few people knew about then. It's in the news now a lot, called the World Economic Forum, WEF. And it was a group that would meet every year in Davos, as they just did 2 weeks ago. It continues. And they are political leaders, business leaders, bankers, tech, leaders of tech companies, in some cases, prime ministers and presidents of nations. And they meet every year, as they have every right to do, to talk about the world and what they envision is the best course for the world. And again, they have every right to do that in Davos, Switzerland, because they're just ideas in a room. Where that changed, and a lot of people don't know this, 2019, right before the pandemic, they signed a formal agreement with the United Nations. Now, the UN has had a program, a lot of people don't know this. The UN, when it comes to world planning, the UN works in 15-year cycles. So, for example, in the year 2000, the big millennial year, we had UN, the millennial goals is what they were called, from 2000 to the year 2015. 2015, those goals expired and they developed a new set of goals called UN SDG 2030. SDG means Sustainable Development Goals. So there are 17 goals, and you can go to their website and look at them, that they hope to have achieved by the year 2030. And on the outside, Amber, they're beautiful goals. Who wouldn't want these goals? Goals like food security for the world and the end of disease in the world and the end of poverty. Beautiful. I support the idea of those goals. Now, you go and dig deep down into the fine print of how they hope to achieve those goals. And what you will find is a horrendous plan to create a world that I personally would not want to live in. Most people don't when they hear about it. And that's why they are so far behind. The UN has said they are so far behind on these goals. Well, they're behind because they're bad ideas. They're really bad
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah.
Okay, 2019, the World Economic Forum and the UN said, we have very similar visions for the world. Let's collaborate. Let's get together. So they formalized an agreement. And it's not a secret. I mean, they made a big public display of it, shaking hands and, showing the document they signed. So now the ideas of the World Economic Forum have teeth to implement them through the United Nations, because many nations in the Western world, including the United States, have also signed on legally to implement ideas that are coming down from the UN. We are legally bound through agreements made by our predecessors, not you and me, and not the current administration, and not even the last administration. This goes way back. And it's not any one particular administration. They're all part of this back for years. And I don't think they really knew what they were getting into. I've had this conversation with politicians that were running in the last two election cycles, and they don't have time to read this stuff. They have no idea. They're relying on the advice of other people. So the bottom line, the Davos Forum completed about 2 weeks ago, and they reiterated in a single sentence their vision for the year 2030 is to merge our physical world, our digital world, and our biological worlds into one massive computerized database that is run and regulated by AI, artificial intelligence. And you're seeing the bits and pieces of that come together. The only way to accomplish that, Amber, is to place the technology inside of our bodies. And the problem with that is when we replace our natural biology with computer chips in the brain, chemicals in the blood, RFID chips under the skin, nanosensors running through the body. When we do that, our natural systems begin to atrophy,
Yeah.
and pretty soon they fail and they're gone forever. And the reason is because of our humanness. Our bodies, once something new comes into the body, our body morphs and adapts to that
Sure.
newness, so it is no longer functioning like it used to. And this is the goal to erode so much of the human capacities that we cherish. Things like emotion, empathy,
Mm.
sympathy, compassion. These are viewed by the, the visionaries in these organizations as flaws that keep us from making good decisions, that our emotion clouds our judgment, for example.
Instead of informing it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So this, I have written this particular book as the term that most people are familiar with to accomplish this biological change inside the human body is transhumanism.
Right.
Trans means beyond
Right.
human, so beyond human. I was at the conference 2 weeks ago, and a scientist came up to me and he said, "Well, Greg, yeah, all this is happening, sure. Isn't it a natural step? Isn't this a
Ah,
natural part of our evolution to merge silicon and computer chips with our biology?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I said, "It is a form of evolution. It's artificial, it's forced evolution. And what we're not being told is the very high price that we pay as a human species when we give ourselves away to the technology. We relinquish the very aspects of our humanness that we have come to, that set us apart from all other forms of life, that we've come
and
to."
there's no going back.
Well, this is what they don't understand. So people say, "Well, can't we just try this?" Like it's a little dial, you dial it forward for a year and put computer chips in your brain, and if it doesn't
Yeah.
work, you go
Right.
back. You can't go back because you're no longer the same biological entity. Your
Yeah.
body has shifted. So this is the graceful sense of urgency. In the next 5 years, and well, now 4 years and 9 months,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
are going to feel the pressure and the really slick, very sexy marketing
The packaging. Oh, yeah.
that tells us if we do these things, if we give away this part of our humanness, it will be phrased that way. What
Yeah.
they'll say is we will be safer, that our lives will be easier, and that we'll have less responsibility, and that we'll be happier. And for individuals who have already been so beaten down by this fractured and broken system,
Yeah.
whose lives are so miserable right now,
Yeah.
that looks like a panacea, and many people will accept it in a heartbeat
Yeah.
because they don't have a reason not to.
Yeah.
So I would never attempt to tell anyone what to do or not. That's not my job. I like to inform people in
Hmm.
terms of the process so that we can recognize it, number one, and then number two, what kind of alternatives do we have? And this is a really cool stuff. I mean, the new discoveries. Well, I'll take a half step back. When I was a kid, the 1950s, 60s, early 70s, and I was in school, everything I learned about the human body was through a biology type book.
Hmm.
And the biology has always looked at us as like soft, wet, sticky, gooey, mushy, stuff
Yeah.
inside the cells, which is one perspective.
Yeah.
But here's what changed about 6 years ago. Some scientists began looking at us not from a biological perspective, but they began looking at the human body from an IT perspective, information technology. And lo and behold, what they found is that every cell, 50 trillion cells in the human body, every one of those cells is a miniature circuit. It has an input and an output, electrical circuit. Every cell's got an electrical potential, very small, 0.07 volts. Not much, but you do the math, 50 trillion times 0.07 volts, and you're talking about 3.5 trillion volts of electrical potential in the human body that can be applied to intuition, to healing, to an immune response. Every cell in the body has the equivalent of electronic components, transistors, resistors, capacitors. We receive photons of light, particles of light, and we transmit photons of light is information. So we
Mhm.
are literally receiving and transmitting, we're in communication with the world and one another. We don't even know necessarily what we're saying. And it goes on and on. We literally are a highly advanced, technologically sophisticated, soft technology. We're not the primitive technology of a physical wire in a computer chip. We're more than that. We are cell membranes that
Mm,
grow and evolve,
mm.
and they self heal, they self replicate, they self diagnose. We are neurons, we're DNA. And the beauty is, as complex as all of that sounds, we have a very simple user interface that allows us to tap this extraordinary potential. And it's the core of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions. Our user interface is thought, feeling, emotion, breath, focus, nutrition, and movement. And in modern scientific terms, these are all called epigenetic triggers. By the way that we utilize these triggers, we actually shift the chemistry and the molecular biology of these extraordinary bodies that we have. And our ancestors, not necessarily scientists, but they sure understood this relationship. So this is what we stand to lose if we replace our biology. We stand to lose this extraordinary potential that gives us the ability to imagine and create and innovate and empathy and sympathy and compassion and all of those human qualities. So I'll stop there for a minute, but I just want to emphasize why this
I
is
could
important.
just, but I do want to ask you on the in your subtitle, you talk about divinity and why that is important in the title is that it's important to you as a part of this discovery and this understanding. And you also said at one point, divinity frees us from fear. And I
Yeah.
think today, as we don't want to look around because feels like there's so much to fear. Now, divinity, evolution, religion, they're different
Yeah, there's a lot of baggage that comes
with
with those
all of that.
words. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, let's just take another half step back. Divinity means different things to different people. And
yeah,
I want to acknowledge that right up front. Many people have linked it with religion because there are schools of divinity that have done that.
yeah.
And I understand that. The contemporary definition of divinity, when I began exploring this, it was kind of a mind blower because the contemporary definition has nothing to do with religion, Amber. It's a very
Right.
brief definition. Divinity is our ability, our human ability, to transcend perceived limitations. And that's it. So let's just break that down. Transcend means to become more than. Perceived limitations, we most probably, and everyone watching or listening, we are living within limits that are not even real. We're living within limitations that we've been programmed to accept or indoctrinated to accept through our immediate family, our friends, our culture, our society,
Media.
obsolete science, religion. So, divinity is our ability to be the best version of ourselves, to transcend the perceived limitations. So, what is divinity? It's a lot of people want to separate it from everyday life. Divinity is everyday life. Our
Mm,
ability to imagine is an expression of human divinity, to create, to innovate. The ability we have to empathize with another being, another form of life. It could be a human, it could be an animal.
mhm,
Empathy, sympathy, compassion. Our ability to heal our bodies begins with our divinity. We must accept that we have the power to heal our bodies, or it's very difficult for the body. Now, the relationship has been established between human emotion and the biology of the body. And if our emotions say that we're not worthy because we've been programmed, or that we're not capable of
mhm,
healing ourselves, it's very difficult for that healing to occur because we're sending a program into the body that it's not happening. Our love begins with divinity. So when we live our fullest capacity of divinity is when we are living the best version of ourselves. And there is a concerted effort in the world right now to deny our divinity because it's through our divinity that we free ourselves from fear and hate. Fear and hate are very valuable commodities when there is an effort to control individuals and populations.
And it
When
separates us from
it's
our
it,
divinity.
well, this is exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
So when we allow ourselves to be separated, and this is happening, so all of this, there's a part of the book that we haven't talked about yet. And first of all, I'm a scientist. I'm a systems thinker. And a systems thinker steps back and looks at the big picture to see the overarching theme of what's driving the little events that happen every day in our lives. They appear random until you look at the big picture, and then you can see that there's a bigger process. There's something missing
Mm.
in our human story that is uncomfortable for many people to talk about. And I've lost friends and I've lost credibility for having this conversation. Uh, our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions tell us that we are engaged in a struggle that began long before this world was ever formed, long before Earth was ever formed. Different ways to position that. You could call it a spiritual struggle between light and dark. And once this world was formed, light and dark were expressed as good and evil. Well, that battle between good and evil, that struggle and the battle that is ensuing, has defined all of human history. Every event that has happened in our recorded and the unrecorded history, every battle, every discovery, the rise and fall of civilizations, of economic systems, banking systems, whatever it has been driven ultimately by this battle between good and evil. And it is driving the changes that we're seeing in our world today. The goal of the battle, this is what it's important to understand this. The goal of the battle is to deny our divinity. The goal of evil is to keep us from the best version of ourselves. The goal of evil is to deny our ability to imagine, to innovate, to create, to love, to heal our own bodies, to forgive without expectation, to love fearlessly. And this is important because evil, it ebbs and flows in history. And we happen to be living at a time, these next 5 years, much of the change that is being driven to deny our humanness is being driven by forces that are expressions of evil. So now maybe the most important thing, the most valuable and useful tool that I could offer to anyone watching this today, evil means different things to different people.
Yeah.
There is kinetic evil, which is playing out in the battlefields of Gaza, Israel, Ukraine, Russia. That's kinetic. But there's psychological evil. There is the psychological evil is when we break the social bonds that hold us together as families
Yeah.
and as a community and a society and a nation. And this has been accomplished in the media by driving the wedge between the rich and the poor,
Yeah.
for example, which is an important conversation that we need to have. And we could have it in kindness to bring us together, yet it was weaponized to drive us apart, and it still is. That
Mm.
same principle between men and women has been weaponized, between blacks and whites, between Christians and Muslims, between Jews and Muslims. Now it's becoming very personal between man and woman, what it means to be a male, what it means to be a female, and the ideas of gender and the differences between adults and children. All of these are important. They need to be discussed. We could discuss them in kindness to bring us together as an even closer, more empowered society, but they've all been weaponized. That is an expression of evil. There is technological evil. Technological evil is when our humanness is diminished through the acceptance of technology into our bodies. That is a form of evil. All right, so now the most important thing I could say, how do we define evil in our lives so it's not this nebulous,
Right.
airy-fairy concept?
Yeah.
Anything that denies our divinity is an expression of evil. Anything that we are asked, coerced, indoctrinated, or mandated to accept that denies our ability to imagine, to create, to innovate, to communicate with one another freely, openly, to share our ideas.
To be
Anything,
unique, I
anything
think.
that denies our ability to love, to
Yeah.
forgive, or to heal, these are all expressions of evil. And it's good for us to not to judge them, but to be able to
Be aware.
recognize them so that we're empowered to recognize them, Amber, so that we don't succumb to the ideas. We're being asked to trade our humanness, to give our humanness away in exchange for efficiency and
Mm.
speed of information and ease of life. If those are your goals, then that's a very clear
And
path.
you've got
And
it.
yeah, and if you cherish and value your humanness, then it's good to recognize, not to judge and not to be angry and create revenge and hate, but to discern is the word and say, I recognize that is an expression of evil, and it's not for me. It's not my path. Thank you. And then walk away from whatever that is. And that takes a
Yeah.
lot of courage sometimes.
Yeah. You do, like you said, you lose friends and you lose colleagues and yeah.
Maybe temporarily, it's
Yeah.
because there's a lot of hurt in the
Yeah.
world right now.
Yeah.
And those friends and colleagues, I think it's probably like a pendulum. Amber, I think there's a point where the pendulum probably will come back and we'll look at one another in the eyes and we'll give one another a hug and say, what were we thinking?
Yeah.
But for right now, there is a polarization
Yeah.
and it's not always easy. I had a young kid, young, I say he was probably, I would say he was in his late teens, come to
Yeah.
one of our
That's young.
programs. It is. He was with his mom. And he came up during the break and he said, Mr. Braden. And I said, please just call me Greg. And he said, Greg, everything you're saying makes perfect sense in this room with these people. He said, when I go to school, nobody thinks this way.
Right.
And what he identified, this is where we have to find our own soul compass. And the workshop of life is living your truth in the presence of a world and a community and a family that may not always support your truth, doing it with kindness,
Yeah.
doing it with kindness because it's true for you, may not be true for them. And I think that's one of those places where words probably fail and you just have to go through the experience. But I think it's important to find a way to do it with kindness. And I'm still learning, Amber. I'm a student.
Oh, we all are.
Yeah, I've lost
Yeah.
people and some of them and our viewing audience knows because they're colleagues in this genre for 30, 35 years. I've known these people who are so afraid of what they're seeing in the world because what they have taught in their lifetime of work did not serve them and prepare them to deal with what the world has brought to their doorstep. And so now they're struggling and
Mhm.
they're saying, how does my work fit into this? And that's a big conversation, for a lot of people.
Well, I think that one of the most important things or salient things or helpful things about your book is that conversation is happening in this book. And as I read it as much as I have, I started asking myself questions and having reflections that I hadn't had ever. It just never occurred to me that, every time I go to the airport or every time I use my card or whether I said yes or no to the vaccine during COVID times. And interestingly enough, when you mentioned healing, that we can heal ourselves, and I thought about all of the times that I have felt guilty and ashamed because I didn't feel good, because I'm the
Mm.
person that eats right and eats everything organic and exercises and, has cotton sheets instead of polyester and blah, 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 filtered water, whatever it is. But I got sick. So there must be, therefore, something wrong with me. So instead of sending my body the message that, hello, I'm listening. What do you need to tell me? Do I need more rest? Do I, whatever? I take away from its ability to heal by, listening to the outside, where I should probably go to the doctor, or maybe I should go to the health food store and ask the people there, because the answer was here. But we've been trained out of the answer, out of
Uh,
speaking and hearing it from ourselves.
it's true, but we live in a very toxic world right
Yeah,
now, more toxic than when you and I were kids. The world has become more
absolutely.
toxic.
Yeah.
And then another perspective, another way of thinking is when you get sick or when I get sick. I started this year, I think I was on New Year's Eve, not feeling 100% and ended up with some weird respiratory thing.
Mm.
The way I prefer to see that is that's my vaccination for the year. That was my body responding to some new bug that now
Yep.
is circulating out there. It's something
Yep.
I hadn't seen before because I do my very best. I try to eat well and, take care of myself to honor my community. If I'm going to be on a stage, my promise is I will do everything I can do to be at my best, to be present for the people. That's my agreement. Their agreement is to be in the room, to be in the seats so that we can have our time together. And I knew that when that happened, I said, okay, well, I'm good for the year because that was the bug du
Yeah.
jour. And we're all exposed to these things.
Yeah.
And there's a really interesting where the way I prefer to see it is this is my body, how my body responds in the presence of a contagion that it's never seen. And that's very different than saying, damn, I'm sick. The two very different
Yeah.
perspectives. And
Yeah.
now, how can I support my
Right.
body to make sense of this unknown contagion? And then we do all the things, that we know how to do. So I don't know of anyone who has not succumbed in to
To
some
something.
degree
Yeah.
to the stuff that is going on out there. The key is how resilient are you? How quickly does it pass through your body? Do you fight it or do you allow it to teach you and pass through your body? It'll pass quickly. If you fight it, that means you lock down. There's literally a tension in your body, and you hold that contagion in the body, and it becomes a battle. But
You said something in your book about bracing for the worst.
well,
And
I just want to take a step back because now that we had this conversation of good and evil,
mm,
and it's poised in some of our texts. For example, if you subscribe to the Dead Sea Scrolls and the biblical texts, 1945 is when the Gnostic texts were discovered in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. 46 and 47 were the Dead Sea Scrolls. Those translations were not allowed to be released to the public, Amber, until 1991.
wow.
And you have to say, what could possibly be in those texts that would warrant the time and the energy and the effort? It'd be easier just to release them than to keep
Yeah.
them under wraps.
Control.
And
Yeah.
and the answer, and you can't make this stuff up. The answer is in the very first cave, in the very first vase that was discovered in the first cave, in the first scroll that was pulled out of the vase that describes what's happening in our world right now. And they didn't want that to be
Mm.
known. And the literal text, it literally says that we are engaged, and these aren't my words, these are the words from this text. And by the way, 2,500 years ago, they weren't dealing with gender issues the way we are. So the word man
Yeah.
is inclusive of male and female. It's humankind, all right?
Yeah.
What the text says is that we are all engaged in a battle between what they call the sons of darkness and the sons of light.
Mm.
And they didn't want that known publicly. But this is what's happening. If it is a battle, what I want to say about this, there's a deeply spiritual component to everything we're talking about. Because we're all going to get through this. We'll come back in the year 2031. You and I should do a little wrap up interview.
Yeah. Let's plan on
We're,
that.
we're going to get through it. But the question is, what have we become
Mm.
in the presence of what the universe brings to our doorstep over these next 5 years? Do we allow the events of the world to drive us to the primal instincts of fear and hate and suspicion of our neighbors and one another? Or can we find a way to transcend those conditions? This is a really subtle difference. The battle between good and evil is not a battle that we want to win,
Mm.
because winning implies conflict. And that is the old idea that keeps us stuck in the hate and the fear of the past. Rather than winning, the secret is we want to triumph in the battle between good and evil. That's different than winning.
Mm.
If the goal, and this is why we did this in the sequence we did, if the goal of evil is to deny our divinity, our ability to transcend perceived limitations, our ability to love, heal, imagine, innovate, create, empathize, sympathize, compassion. If the goal is to deny that, then the way we triumph is by living those qualities in our lives, living the best version of ourselves. We triumph over evil, but we don't fight against the evil. It's a very, very different concept. And I think it's a very
I
powerful concept.
Yeah, that is. And I wanted to ask you in our last few minutes here, what can we individually and
Sure.
collectively, for those who desire community, what can we do to facilitate more triumph for ourselves
Yeah,
and our world?
it's an easy question to answer. We live the best version of ourselves. We love without fear. We forgive without the expect. Often people forgive and then they look around to see who saw them forgive so they can be acknowledged for their forgiveness. That's not true forgiveness. We forgive without expectation. We love without fear. We imagine freely. We innovate, we
Mm.
create, and we verbalize and we share ideas with other individuals freely. We do these things. We heal our bodies. We're not afraid to empathize with those who are less fortunate and sympathize and express compassion when we do, and more. When we do these things, this is how we are living our divinity, all right,
Mm.
and triumphing. It really comes down to love. And this is a question, if we're wrapping this here soon, then this is what I would like to leave with our community. It all comes down to love. The question that each of us has to ask ourselves, do we love ourselves enough to accept our own divinity, to accept the power? Because divinity frees us from hate and fear. There's a power in that. Do we accept the power and the responsibility that comes with living our divinity? And the answer, it's not verbal, it's the way we live our lives. You can say yes, but then what choices do you make? So it's the way that we choose to live every moment of every day. And we will be given many opportunities over these next 5 years to demonstrate in our lives what we claim in our hearts. Do we love ourselves enough to accept the gift of our divinity and our humanness? I personally believe we're worth preserving. And there are a lot of academics and very well-known public figures who would differ and
Right.
believe that we are so flawed that we need a remake. So I've
Great
given
reset.
a
Yes.
reset. Yeah, that's the great reset is what 2030 is being called.
Yeah.
So we covered a lot of ground, and I just want to acknowledge, I know it's a very different way of thinking for some people, and for
Mhm.
some it's right up their alley, especially if it's your community. I'm sure they're very well informed. But I know for a lot of people, actually verbalizing some of these concepts is different for them.
Yeah.
And the idea that the whole purpose of everything we're doing is just to empower our global family to be the best version of ourselves and create the best world possible. And that's where we're coming from on this.
That is it. That's the nutshell
Yeah,
bumper sticker focus.
I
And
think
I
so.
just want to thank you so much, Greg, for spending this time with me and with our community. Your community is mine and mine is yours. And I really feel that this is such a pivotal time in our world. And we are on the front edge of the wave as usual. And
Yeah.
the teachings that you bring all the time, not just in this book, that you bring as you travel the world, are what will make this change not just possible, but informed. And I so appreciate
Hmm.
that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for recognizing the value and acknowledging that and for sharing a little bit of your day with me.
Yeah.
And, Amber, for your trust, because you're trusting me with your community. And the truth is, these are unscripted. You never know precisely what's going to be
No.
said. And I recognize that. So thank you for your friendship, many
Mm,
more years than I can count, and your
yeah.
trust and your love and support. And I look forward very much to our next.
It's my honor, honey.
All right. Thank you.
All right.